February 1943. A freezing night over the North Sea. A Royal Air Force bomber limps through the darkness, one engine failing. Fuel gauge is falling, ice forming across the wings. Inside the aircraft, exhausted men stare into black void below. They have survived enemy fighters. They have survived anti-aircraft fire. They have survived Germany. But they may not survive England. The pilot lowers the landing gear. Nothing happens. A red warning light glows inside the cockpit. The wheels should be locked. They are not. At nearly 200 miles per hour, thousands of pounds of metal are preparing to strike the runway. If the landing gear collapses, the bomber will cartwheel into flames. Fuel tanks will rupture. Ammunition will explode. Men who escape the enemy will die only seconds from home. The crew waits. The pilot circles the airfield again. Ground crews below watch helplessly. They have seen this before. Too many times. Aircraft return from combat missions only to crash during landing. Wheels refuse to lock. Landing gear jams. Entire crews die within sight of safety. Investigators blame stress, bad weather, pilot error, enemy damage. But the accidents continue, and the number keeps rising. Dozens, then hundreds. More than 300 RAF airmen are dead. No one can explain why. Not engineers, not commanders, not the aircraft manufacturers. Somewhere inside thousands of parts, wires, bolts, and hydraulic systems, a tiny failure is hiding. Invisible, silent, deadly. The war does not stop while experts search for answers. Bombers continue flying. Crews continue dying. And inside a crowded factory far from the front lines, a woman studies a small brass washer. It is cheap, ordinary, almost worthless. A part so insignificant that few people even notice it exists. No medals are awarded to brass washers. No newspapers write about them. No pilots think about them before climbing into their aircraft. Yet somehow, this forgotten piece of metal may hold the answer to a mystery that has already killed hundreds of men. How can something smaller than a coin decide whether an aircraft lands safely or bursts into flames? How can experienced engineers miss it? And why does the solution come not from senior officers or famous designers, but from a woman whose name history almost forgets? Because somewhere between the factories, the laboratories, and the burning wreckage scattered across British airfields, one tiny object waits to reveal a truth nobody expects. A truth that changes the fate of RAF crews. A truth measured not in inches, but in lives. But this story does not begin beside a runway. And it does not begin with a brass washer. It begins with a war that demands machines perform perfectly, and with the one person willing to question the smallest detail of all. Britain enters the darkest years of the Second World War with one overwhelming problem. Aircraft are being lost faster than they can be replaced. Factories operate day and night. Workers sleep for only a few hours before returning to production lines. Every bolt, rivet, and hydraulic component becomes part of a national struggle for survival. The RAF depends on its aircraft. The aircraft depend on their engineers. And the engineers depend on thousands of small parts that nobody ever sees. Among these workers is a woman whose job appears unremarkable. She is not a pilot. She is not a commander. She does not sit in war rooms or attend strategy meetings. She works with machinery, measurements, and components so small they can disappear in the palm of a hand. Yet, war often hides its most important people in ordinary places. As bomber operations intensify, disturbing reports begin arriving from RAF stations. Aircraft return damaged but flyable. Pilots lower their landing gear. The systems respond incorrectly. Wheels fail to lock. Indicator lights behave unpredictably. Hydraulic pressure disappears. Some aircraft skid down runways. Others collapse. Some burst into flames. Investigators search for obvious causes. Enemy fire. Maintenance mistakes. Pilot fatigue. But patterns begin to emerge. Many crashes happen in aircraft that show no major combat damage. The landing systems appear mechanically sound. Replacement parts fail as often as older components. The mystery deepens. Every accident means more than destroyed machinery. Entire crews are lost. Veteran pilots disappear. Navigators vanish. Bomb aimers never return home. Families receive telegrams explaining that loved ones died in accidents after surviving combat missions. For many airmen, the journey home becomes more frightening than the mission itself. Engineers dismantle damaged aircraft. Hydraulic systems are tested. Valves are inspected. Pipes are replaced. Nothing explains the failures. Some believe the problem is unavoidable. War places enormous strain on machinery. Losses are accepted. But not everyone accepts that answer. One woman notices something others overlook. A small brass washer. Simple, cheap, almost invisible. The component appears insignificant compared to engines, landing gear assemblies, and hydraulic pumps. Yet she begins asking questions. Why are these washers wearing differently? Why do some show unusual damage? Why do failures occur under specific conditions? Why does nobody pay attention to them? Large machines often attract attention. Tiny parts do not. But complex systems depend on their smallest components. A single weakness can destroy an entire aircraft. As investigations continue, evidence points toward minute mechanical failures affecting hydraulic operation. Components shift slightly. Pressure changes. Movement becomes unreliable. Under normal circumstances, the effects remain invisible. Under combat conditions, they become deadly. Cold temperatures, vibration, repeated stress, heavy landings, all combine to expose a weakness hidden inside the system. The brass washer, dismissed as insignificant, suddenly becomes important. Tests are conducted. Measurements are repeated. Engineers compare failed components with functioning ones. Patterns appear. The impossible begins to make sense. The washer is not simply a washer. It controls spacing, alignment, pressure, movement. When it fails, other parts fail. When other parts fail, landing gear refuses to lock. And when landing gear refuses to lock, aircraft crash. The discovery shocks investigators. Hundreds of deaths may trace back to one overlooked component. Not an engine, not enemy action, not pilot mistakes. A washer. War often rewards dramatic acts. Dogfights, battles, heroes charging through gunfire. But sometimes courage appears differently. Sometimes it means refusing to ignore a tiny detail. Sometimes it means questioning accepted assumptions. Sometimes it means speaking when nobody wants to listen. The woman behind the discovery continues her work while bombers fly overhead and air raid sirens echo across Britain. She receives little attention. The newspapers focus on pilots. The public celebrates victories. Factories remain anonymous, yet the impact spreads quietly. Designs change. Production standards improve. Inspections become stricter. Aircraft become safer. Pilots who never know her name return home alive. Landing accidents decline. Crews step from aircraft that might otherwise have become wrecks. History rarely notices such moments. There are no dramatic speeches. No victory parades. No photographs of a tiny brass washer on front pages. But somewhere on a cold runway, a bomber lands safely. Its wheels lock. Its crew survives. And nobody realizes a forgotten component. And the woman who refused to ignore it may have saved them. Because war is not won only by those who carry weapons. It is won by people who solve problems. People who notice details. People who believe that small things matter. Factories become battlefields. Workbenches become front lines. And knowledge becomes a weapon. The brass washer remains physically insignificant. It costs almost nothing. It fits inside a pocket. Yet its influence reaches across thousands of flights. Hundreds of crews. Countless families. The tragedy of the RAF losses reveals a painful truth. Machines are only as reliable as their smallest parts. And societies are only as strong as the people willing to protect those parts. As the war continues, new aircraft enter service. Technology improves. Britain advances. But hidden within that progress is the work of a woman history nearly forgets. A woman who sees value where others see scrap. A woman who understands that details save lives. And a woman whose forgotten discovery proves that sometimes the smallest object in a war can carry the greatest weight. The war eventually moves forward. New aircraft arrive. Production increases. Airfields grow busier. And many of the dangerous failures that once haunted RAF crews begin to disappear. Pilots continue flying missions over occupied Europe. Bombers continue crossing dark skies. But more crews return safely. More aircraft touch the runway and remain standing. More men step out of their cockpits and walk home. Most never learn why. They did not know the name of the woman whose attention to a tiny brass washer helped solve a deadly mystery. They never see the reports. They never visit the factories. They never understand how close they came to becoming another statistic. History usually remembers generals. It remembers fighter aces. It remembers famous commanders and dramatic battles. Yet countless victories depend upon people who never fire a weapon. The woman behind this story receives little recognition compared to those on the front lines. No enormous monuments celebrate her work. Few books tell her story. But the impact remains. Hundreds of lives may depend upon a detail that others ignore. And perhaps that is a true lesson of war. Great disasters often begin with small failures. Great solutions often begin with small observations. A brass washer seems worthless until it saves an aircraft, until it saves a crew, until it changes history. The men who flew RAF bombers faced enemy fighters, anti-aircraft guns, storms, and darkness. They expected danger from the enemy. They did not expect it from a tiny piece of metal hidden deep inside their aircraft. Yet one woman sees what others miss. She refuses to dismiss the insignificant. She proves that intelligence, patience, and determination can become weapons every bit as powerful as guns or bombs. Today, the aircraft of the Second World War rest in museums. Their engines are silent. Their runways are quiet. Visitors admire their size, their weapons, their heroic stories. Few people think about the smallest components hidden inside them, but somewhere inside those machines is a reminder. Every rivet matters. Every bolt matters. Every washer matters. And every person who refuses to ignore a problem matters. The war ends. The pilots go home. The factories fall silent. The brass washer becomes just another forgotten object. But its lesson survives. Because history often celebrates the people who stand in the spotlight. Yet sometimes the people who change the world stand beside a workbench, holding a tiny piece of metal, asking a question nobody else thinks to ask. And somewhere in the darkness of wartime Britain, while bombers descend safely toward home, one forgotten woman proves that the smallest things can carry the greatest weight. The aircraft are remembered. The battles are remembered. The victories are remembered. But sometimes history turns not on great machines, but on a single brass washer that refuses to be ignored.